Well, good morning, everyone. Today we get to talk about the thing that we've been discussing all month, which is doubt. And this has been interesting um, because when I remember when Reverend Jackie first broached this subject, it was actually before the theme of this week. And I don't know if you remember Reverend Jackie, but it was actually a few months back. And you had a part of your talk where you spoke about how starting to look at doubt differently. And I remember that touched me profoundly, right? And started to help me to look at that as being a tool that we actually use. So it was really a great segue into today's talk. But good morning, everyone. And our affirmation for the day is going to be very simple. And that affirmation is love is the foundation of my questions and my curiosities. Love is going to be the foundation. The reason why we're questioning what's happening with ourselves, what's happening with our approach to either our goals or where we want to be in life. Now, a lot of us, certainly myself, was raised to believe that faith and doubt are on opposite sides of the spectrum. You're either a person who is full of faith or you're a doubting Thomas. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, the idea being that if you have faith, then you should never doubt because you, I guess, are a righteous person or a holy person, whatever term you want to use, right? You're a person who's full of faith and you walk around with it on your chest. Now, if you doubt, then of course you must not be a person of faith. But what if doubt is actually not the opposite of faith? And what if doubt is actually the very thing that we can use to drive us deeper into faith? It really comes down to how we look at doubt. It comes down to how we handle doubt because doubt's a natural human emotion, right? It's a cautiousness that pops up in us when we're approaching something that is unknown. We're going to a new part of our life that's unknown. We are moving ourselves to a goal or to an end result that's unknown. But what if it's possible that some of our greatest spiritual breakthroughs are actually going to begin with these very same questions that we refuse or we don't want to ask? So today, I want to suggest to you that doubt is not the enemy of devotion, but sometimes doubt is devotion. Sometimes when we wrestle, that's how our transformation starts, or that's how our transformation begins. And nowhere do we see this more clearly than this biblical story of Jacob and the angel. Now, in this concept or this philosophy of new thought, when we look at books like the Bible, we don't look at them as historical documents that document everything that happened exactly how it happened, but instead as a guide, it's a allegory. These are stories that, if understood properly, can help provide us with a lot of great guidance. And Ernest Holmes went through a painstaking process of helping us to understand this book in particular because it's so pervasive within Western culture. And I'm speaking of Ernest Holmes. So if we have any guests who are not familiar with Ernest Holmes, he has this great text called the Science of Mind text. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it guides and informs what we teach about. And I'm going to use that to guide and inform this story about this crisis that this man named Jacob faced. So years earlier, Jacob deceived his father, Isaac, and he stole a blessing that was intended for his brother Esau. So, of course, that sounds very biblical, right? He stole a blessing. But in that culture, in that time, that was a big deal. And that has spiritual significance as well if we were to dig deep into it. But I really want to focus on the story because it really speaks to what we're learning this month. Now, Esau was so enraged that his blessing was stolen that Jacob had to flee for his life. He had to get away. He was real hot with him. And so for about 20 years, Jacob lived away from his home and away from his tribe. But during that time, he did accumulate wealth. He had the blessing, of course. He got married. He had children, which was considered part of your wealth in that era. And he became extremely successful, but he never resolved this conflict with his brother Esau. Now, how many of us have been like that where we've had relationships with our children, with our parents, uncles, and aunts that were unresolved? And you carry around or you walk around with that pain, that emptiness or that hole that you want to be you want fulfilled. You want to close that gap. You may want to reestablish or repair that relationship with someone and it weighs on your heart. Well, even though this is a story, and even if this was an actual event that took place, I think that we could always, all of us can relate to that, wanting to re-engage with our loved ones. We want to make things right, particularly when we're the ones who committed the wrong. I think that's a natural human desire and tendency. But for Jacob, of course, there's a lot of doubt because he did something that was really, really bad in the cultural context of this family, in this tribe. So he decides, I'm going to make my way toward my homeland. And so he has his whole, what do you want to call it? His whole new tribe or family with him. And so he's making his way back to where Esau lives, and he has a scout go ahead. And that scout comes back to him and tells him that, yeah, I think your brother knows you're coming. He has 400 men waiting for you. And so he's like, oh, okay, this is not going to work out that well. And so he's even more filled with doubt now. So Jacob just assumes the worst. And so he believes his past is finally caught up with him. He's filled with fear. And I believe that all of us have been there. You know, sometimes God calls us forward, but everything in front of us tells us that a disaster is coming. That's where Jacob was sitting. But he continued to move forward anyway. He moved forward in faith. Faith is not the absence of doubt, but instead, faith is movement in the presence of doubt. He sees, okay, there's 400 soldiers in front of me, but my goal is to reestablish this relationship with my brother to make amends for the wrong that I did. I'm going to move forward in faith that there is a way that we can correct this, that we can fix this. And so Jacob, he sends gifts ahead. He sends gifts to Esau to hopefully soften his brother's anger, right? I'm just going to reach out to the parents here. How many of us have tried to alleviate our guilt by buying things for our kids? Maybe I'm not, maybe I'm the only one. Right? Maybe too much time away from home because you're working, or you got angry and you probably said a few things that you wish that you could take back, and so you try to make up for it with physical things, with material things. And so Jacob attempted to do that, but he divided his camp in the case of attack. He said, well, this doesn't work. I want to make sure that my servants and my children and my wife, well, in his case, wives, you know, Old Testament, right? Wanted to make sure that they're all okay. So it says it sends his possessions across the river of Jabbok. And there's even some wisdom in the naming of that would make this lecture much longer. So we're going to skip that for today. However, he sends everyone to a safe place, and now he is alone. He says, I'm going to face this entire army alone. This is a situation that I created. I'm not going to bring everyone else into this. And how many of us do that? When we're in these very trying points in our lives, instead of looking to others for strength in our communities, we try to face it alone all the time, right? When we have resources around us, we have people who care for us, who love us, who will pray with us, but we want to face this alone. Now, truly, it is only God that we truly need. But to have your community around you to support you through prayer is a powerful thing. But Jacob did what many of us do. We try to go at it alone. And scripture says, and Jacob was left alone, and there he wrestled with a man with him until the breaking of the day. And that's where the story really starts. So in this allegorical story, he encounters this mysterious figure in the dark, and they begin to struggle with each other. They're wrestling. Right, they're in a knockdown, ancient ancient Judea bar fight. Right, these guys are just going at it all night long. So this struggle begins, and the Bible makes this really clear. This isn't a brief encounter. This lasts all night. I mean, they're going at it all night. Now, I don't know here if anyone has done any kind of wrestling or jujitsu or what's it called, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. But I'll tell you this: just a few minutes of that will get you extremely tired. It's an extremely it's a sport that requires you to use every part of your muscle and your mind, right? Because you're going through this process of trying to get the upper hand on someone else while they're trying to do the same thing to you. My point being is that this exhausts you both spiritually, mentally, and physically. However, neither side has advantage. Jacob refuses to quit. He is going to keep wrestling with this stranger, this mysterious being all night. And then finally, this stranger must know some kind of special technique, because it says in the scripture that he touches Jacob's hip, and instantly Jacob's hip is out of joint now. So this guy really knows what he's doing, right? And they're fighting all night. So he is wounded. And even though he's wounded, he refuses to let go. This is not merely a physical struggle now. It's a spiritual struggle. It's a struggle between who Jacob has been and who Jacob is becoming. This is a struggle between faith and fear, a struggle between doubt and realization. Now, as the dawn begins to approach, the stranger says, "Let me go, for day breaketh." And Jacob responds, "I will not let thee go, except thou bless me." So as the dawn is coming, so there, you ever heard that expression, there's light at the end of the tunnel when you're going through a dark time? So light's coming, and now that difficulty in your life wants to flee away from you because it sees you're not going to back down. That difficulty in your life represents darkness, and it wants to flee from you because you stood in the light of faith. And he says, "I'm not going to let you go. I'm going to deal with this situation. I'm going to deal with this doubt in my life, and I want a blessing out of it. I will not let you go except thou bless me." That's a true statement. Jacob is exhausted. He's wounded. He's afraid, and he doesn't even really understand who he's wrestling, right? Of course, this is an allegory story, but this would be weird for me if I'm wrestling someone in the dark and I don't know who I'm wrestling, right? That alone would freak me out. Okay, but he's wrestling something he doesn't fully understand, but he refuses to release that encounter until he receives a blessing from it. And then comes his question: "What is thy name?" That's what this mysterious entity says to him. "What is thy name?" And Jacob says, "Jacob." And so then the stranger says, "Thy name shall be called Jacob no more, but Israel. For as a prince has thou power with God and with men has prevailed." What does that mean? That means that he sat there, or not sat there, but he struggled with his problem. He struggled with that doubt. He struggled with those things that are inside of us that hold us back. And the blessing in the end of his struggle was not money. The blessing in the end was not protection. It wasn't success. The blessing was transformation. Jacob received a whole new identity, and he was called Israel, one who wrestles with God, one who prevails through struggle, one who remains engaged, one who refuses to walk away from the hard questions. Now, if you think back over your life, you have had some challenges that you decided I'm going to face, and you took those challenges head on. And some of them were were tough. They were life altering. There are those in this room who have been to physical war, and they had to endure that and come out of that. There are those here who have had traumatic relationships that they had to survive. There are those here who have went through great quote unquote failures of business and maybe lost millions of dollars. There are those here who may have been in the prison system. There are those of us who just had our hearts crushed because someone that we love dearly died. There, all of us have all these different challenges, but we had struggled through those challenges. And because we struggled through them, we became something new, something objectively different from who we were before. We let that situation build us into a new being with new strength, new insight. We're not who we were. And we know that. And then that became a part of who we were. And we carried that ability with us so much to the point that we don't even think about it anymore. It is who we are. There is a blessing in meeting face to face with God. Jacob asked the stranger a question now. He says, "Tell me, I pray thee, thy name." The stranger doesn't really answer him directly, but instead it says in scripture, and Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen the face of God, and my life is preserved. Interestingly enough, in that block of text there, in Genesis 32:30, that word for that place where Jacob was wrestling with this being almost sounds like the pineal gland within the human mind. That's probably a whole other subject that I'd probably like to sit down and spend some time with, but I found that interesting. That's the place where he's struggling with God. Does that mean that he's struggling with God, with doubt, with these things within his mind? Now, earlier, that figure was called a man, but Jacob realizes that that encounter was actually a divine encounter. And this is what's really remarkable. Jacob did not find that God, that real self within, by avoiding struggle. He was able to meet face to face with God, with his real self, by dealing with struggle head on. He found God in the wrestling. He found God in the questions. He found God in his uncertainty. So that next morning, Jacob is limping. He's all hurt. He's limping away from this encounter that he has, but he's leaving blessed. He's wounded, but he's blessed. And that really matters. That detail matters because transformation often leaves evidence. Growth changes us. We don't emerge from some great spiritual encounter unchanged. If you have any great undertaking in your life that requires you to struggle, it's going to change you. And soon afterward, Jacob met with Esau. All 400 of those soldiers rolled in, and he's by himself. And he's probably thinking to himself, oh boy, here we go. And so they all come up. And soon after, the thing that he feared the most didn't happen. His brother Esau met him, and he embraced him and hugged him. And the catastrophe that Jacob imagined in his mind never arrived at all. How often do we or have we suffered over events that never came to pass? They're all in our imagination. How often have we created a future in our minds, a future reality that never actually delivered? Jacob's doubt, however, led to him wrestling. That wrestling transformed him before the situation ever changed. Now, a lot of times we're taught that faith means certainty, but is it really faith when you know the outcome? No. It only becomes faith when we know that we're stepping into the darkness or we're stepping into the unknown and we don't know what the outcome's going to be. But we have full faith in the God of our heart and that God within us that we are directed aright. We are praying, we are meditating, and we're saying to ourselves, I trust in the God within. Now, faith begins where certainty ends. So through our visualization, our prayers, through our spiritual practice, we can see that end result in our minds and have something to move toward. That's going to develop our faith. But unfortunately, many of us were taught that our questions mean weakness. We were taught that our questions, but our questions can actually mean growth. These questions mean that our consciousness is expanding and that wisdom is calling to us. Speaking of which, there is a book called The Wisdom of Solomon. And the wisdom of Solomon was, well, in some traditions, like the Ethiopian Bible, it's still a part of that book. It's an older book, and it wasn't included in the Nicene Creed, so you don't see it inside the King James Bible. But it's a very interesting read if you ever have an opportunity. It's a short read as well, but it has a lot of packed in wisdom. And I'd like to share a small piece of this with you before I end today. Wisdom is glorious and never fadeth away. Yea, she is seen of them that love her, and found of such that as seek her. She preventeth them that desire her, in making herself first known unto them. Whoso seeketh her early shall have no great travail, for he shall have found her sitting at his doors. To think therefore that her perfection of wisdom and those who watcheth for her shall quickly be without care. For she goeth about seeking as are worthy of her, showeth herself favorably unto him in the ways, and meeteth them in every hour of thought. Now, I'm going to not spend a ton of time going into that because there's a lot here, but I would like you to remember this. In many parts of these scriptures in the Judeo-Christian realm, they refer to he a lot when they refer to spiritual beings or things of that nature. But I want you to notice specifically that it uses the feminine form here to refer to wisdom. And there's a reason behind that. But of course, unfortunately, we don't have time to go into that today. But I want to bring that to your attention because maybe that's something that you want to dive into. And using Ernest's Holmes' Science of Mind as a guide, it can open some things for you as it did for me. But I want you to take that with you. And I want you to consider the person that I mentioned at the very beginning of this talk, Thomas. He was branded a doubting Thomas. Now, this is one of Jesus's steadfast disciples, actually. This is the guy who was always ready to, whatever the boss wanted to do, he was ready to go with him. Okay. But he was named this because he's seen all these miracles that Jesus performed during his lifetime. But after he had saw the man die and someone comes back to you and says, well, he rose again, how would you react? Right? If you saw someone pass away and then someone comes back to you and say, well, yeah, they're back. I mean, you may have some trouble accepting that as well. In fact, he says, except shall I see in his hands the print of nails, and put my fingers into the print of those nails, and thrust my hands into his side, I will not believe. That means he was nailed to the cross. And he was also, hitting the ribs with a spear by one of the soldiers. He's basically saying, I want to put my finger in those wounds and see him walking around, and then I'm going to believe. We've all said something like that. We've said something to the effect of when hell freezes over, right? You're saying like, I want to see something absolutely impossible, and then I'm going to believe it. So a lot of us have done the same thing. We have seen things in our lives. Our life has probably fallen apart. Some of us at some point. Maybe we had a dream die, a relationship end, a business fails, a ministry struggle. And so we begin to examine the wounds. We don't think that we can come back from that. So we're examining those wounds. We're doing a post-mortem. We ask ourselves what happened. What did we miss? What could we have done differently? We're performing a post-mortem on our disappointments. We're poking those wounds. And if we do this through self-pity, we become bitter. We begin to miss the lesson. We stop growing. But if we ask these questions through faith, then something different happens. We begin to learn. We begin to grow. We keep moving. So just as when Jesus was going to the cross, to Calvary, as the Christians call it, this hill called Golgotha, and he fell because he's carrying the cross. And just for a modern day uh context here, he was sentenced to die. And God forbid if any of us were in the same position. It's like you being told, here, I want you to carry the electric chair to the place where you're going to be electrocuted, right? So there's some, not only are we going to do you in, I'm also going to psychologically abuse you on the way by having you carry the instrument that's going to destroy you. Okay. So that's the position that he was in. He was going to his death and he fell down on the way doing it. This cross is really heavy. And so this guy named Simon appears to help him, not one of his disciples. And no, not that Simon either. For some reason, Simon's a popular name in the Bible, but this is a different Simon. So he helps him carry the cross. He helps him up when he's fallen down, but he helps him carry the cross all the way to this hill called Golgotha. And the point here behind that is that when we're moving toward our goal and things are really tough and they're falling apart, if we keep going in faith, even though we understand that we are questioning, if we keep moving forward in faith, knowing that things will work out, unexpected help will arrive. It may not come when you want it, but it will come when you need it. And that hill that Jesus went to, it represents where the place where we go and allow the old self to die. Because in order to have that transformation that we need in our lives, we can't be who we were. This is the place where limitation is surrendered, the place where resurrection becomes possible. So these questions that we ask, they're going to emerge in your life when your old beliefs no longer fit, when deeper truths are trying to emerge in your life, and when hidden wounds that you've been carrying for so many years are asking for healing. These questions that you are asking to the God within are going to reveal your fears, your feelings of unworthiness, your inherited limitations, your spiritual stagnation, all your hidden desires, and what your deeper callings are. And a lot of times we fear these questions because they become a part of our identity. It seems like we're questioning our identity. And we fear losing certainty. We fear losing belonging. We fear the growth actually that's required, the vulnerability that's required. And it's uncomfortable. But that growth requires the willingness for us to grow out of these old versions of ourselves. Ernest Holmes taught us that faith is active participation with the universal mind, not blind acceptance, not passive belief. And this is living participation. So faith is not pretending that you don't have questions. Faith is trusting truth enough to explore those questions honestly. Faith says, I do not understand everything, but I trust spirit enough to keep walking. I trust life enough to keep seeking, and I trust God enough to keep wrestling. And so I'll close with this. Jacob walked into the night full of doubt. He walked into the night afraid. He walked into the night with uncertainty in his heart. But he stayed in the encounter. He stayed with his difficulty. He wrestled with his doubt. He asked the questions. He wrestled till dawn, meaning when light came. And because he stayed with those questions, he emerged transformed. So perhaps the goal in our lives is not to necessarily eliminate doubt. Perhaps the goal is to remain faithful while doubt is present. So let us all keep seeking. Let us all use doubt so we can keep growing, so that we can keep loving. And to do this, we must keep wrestling. Because sometimes the blessing is not on the other side of uncertainty. Sometimes the blessing is hidden in the struggle itself. And when we refuse to let go, we're going to keep asking those questions. We're going to keep wrestling. We're not going to back down. When we refuse to let go until that blessing appears, we discovered what Jacob discovered. The very place that we wrestled with God becomes the place where we meet face to face with God. So today I leave you with this singular question. What if the doubt you've been trying to escape is actually the doorway to your greatest expression of your faith? And so ends the lesson, and so it is.